Hi, I'm Sarah.
Hi, I'm Charlotte.
Hi, I'm Rebecca.
Hi, I'm Kristen.
And today we're talking about women in male-dominated workplaces. Um, I think the interesting thing with us today on this call is we have a research scientist with us and a nursery practitioner. And when I think of those two jobs, I think they're quite different in the way that society kind of expects the roles to be held. I think when I think of schools and nurseries, I think, women teachers, because we're always pushed towards like the more nurturing jobs. And then when I think of sort of the sciencey kind of, mechanical engineering and all those sort of things as well, I always imagine that, done by men. Um, Obviously, we're here to change that and prove that wrong today. But I think it's like it'll be very interesting to get different points of views and understand why each of you chose to go for the career path you went to and any sort of issues you've had within those.
I think what you say is really true. I think people kind of have these images in their head of like what certain people in certain careers look like. And I think that's true of everybody, whether you describe yourself as a feminist or not. Like I would say even feminists tend to think of certain careers being quite female dominated and certain careers being quite male dominated. And it's something that actually we've tried to do a lot. So I've been a research scientist for about 5-6 years now. And something we used to do quite a lot, especially a few years ago, kind of pre-pandemic, we used to go into schools quite a bit. So we worked with an organization called the SAW Trust. So Science, Art and Writing is what SAW stands for. And we basically like run little days in classrooms with like a couple of scientists, a couple of artists, a couple of writers around like a certain topic in science, nothing kind of too complicated. They were normally like kids of kind of 7-8 years old. And what was really interesting about it was that we would always start the day with all of us lined up at the front, and we'd get these kids to kind of pick who they thought were the scientists, who they thought were the writers, and who they thought were the artists. And they almost always said that I was either an artist or a writer. And that just goes to show that even at such a young age, it's like imprinted in their brains. And I think conversations like this are really important just to kind of change those ideas.
Definitely. And I think as well, like when I think of, when everyone was a kid, but when I was a kid, I had a poster on the wall that had the alphabet. And I remember N was nurse, and I think F was firefighter or something. And the nurse was a woman and the firefighter was a man. And I think, even from such young things like that, like something you think is just nothing, it really does like put a print in our brain of who is meant to hold each role.
Exactly. And that's kind of what causes, I think, a lot of the problems that we have in these professions today, because people just have these kind of unconscious biases in the back of their minds.
Definitely. Kristen, what about you?
Yeah, I want to build on that and say, like, at nursery, even within the kids. So my classroom was 2 and under, and even like the practitioners would even encourage gender stereotypes, like even like which would steer maybe towards certain jobs, even at that age. So like if the boys went and knocked down loads of blocks, they'd be like, oh, they're just being boys. And they wouldn't necessarily be told off either, be like, oh, they're just being boys. And, let them just be boys. And then the girls, playing with dollies were like very much encouraged to play with the dolls as well. And it was in some ways very traditional in nursery. And it wasn't all like, I mean, in the nursery, it's all women as well, like from the management, down to assistant practitioners, everyone's a woman. I mean, I know of like a sister nursery to ours has like one male in it, and then the only male in our nursery is the chef Jamie, and it's quite interesting that he is the only he is the only male and he's the chef, and all the rest of us are like looking after the kids, and then he'll come and bring the food. In that way, it's very kind of traditional, quite, if you think about a household, quite traditional, like
like he's bringing the bread, like a breadwinner.
Yeah, that not necessarily he's cooking, but the idea that he's bringing the bread and like we the kids. So in that way, that in the nursery, I think nurseries in general in that respect are quite traditional, because even in my early childhood course, Hope, it was mostly women doing the course, and like maybe like 3 men out of like maybe 80 of us or something. So
it's crazy.
Yeah, it's very, very female dominated, definitely.
That's really interesting actually, because when I was thinking kind of back to how I kind of got to where I am, And I was thinking that actually at my kind of undergraduate degree level, it was pretty much 50-50 in terms of women and men on the course. But I feel like progressively, as I've got further and further through my career, it's kind of this leaky pipeline almost, where just sort of more and more women kind of fall out of those roles. And when you look around at kind of senior scientists in those kind of group leader positions, they're still very much in the minority. And I think that makes it hard for, especially, you know, like when you're a student, or like I'm still an early career researcher. And it can be a real challenge to kind of picture yourself in those senior positions if you've got no kind of role models there to relate to, and to see that, oh, they've done it, so it must be possible, kind of thing.
Absolutely. I think like my sister is actually at Norwich as well, and she's
Oh,
doing,
really?
yeah, she's actually doing chemistry. She's in her second year, and I'd be quite interested when she's thinking of doing a master's afterwards. But I'd be quite interested when she kind of goes into the workplace, like you're saying, you know, those kind of stereotypes, and how far you can get, you know, whether you're female or male, and how many opportunities you get as well. So I'm quite interested to see kind of, because obviously at the moment, like you say, I'd say it's pretty, she says it's pretty 50-50 male and female, her course.
Yeah,
But it would be quite interesting to see as she gets into the workplace how maybe that changes. It'd be quite interesting to see.
definitely. And I think, you know, there's obviously women who do it, and fantastic women and men who get into those kind of senior positions. But I do think still some of the systems that are in place, particularly in kind of academic sciences, they do make it harder for women to get into those positions in terms of, I mean, I've been told personally that it's good to kind of move around a lot. So a lot of scientists were on temporary contracts. So my current contract is a 3-year one, but that's actually quite a long position. And you're told like, oh, it's a really good thing to move around a lot so that you get more experiences, or even to work abroad. And that's great. But actually it tends to be women, especially as you do get a little bit older, that want to settle down or that have the children, and they just can't do those things. And so the way it's set up just makes it harder to, you know, to get into those roles. And I think that's half the problem. You know, if you've got a system that's set up for one gender, it makes it really hard then for the other to kind of get in and get climb that ladder.
I'd really like to add to that point, because a woman in my family who would like to remain anonymous has actually told me that when she first started out in her job, which she also wants to remain anonymous, but it is a male-dominated workplace. But she said that when she first started out, she was always constantly looking for a promotion to get like a, you know, higher paid than the men around her. And she said that there were so many opportunities for her to get the higher paid jobs, but instead they were recruiting men to take those jobs rather than taking her, who's been there for a number of years, and putting her in that job. She'd shown full interest, and she eventually got really fed up with it. She said it happened like 4 or 5 times, and she, you know, took her boss aside and said, "What is this about?" I think this was in the 80s, I think, if I'm remembering correctly from what she said. And the response from the boss was, well, there's not really much point us hiring you, because we want someone who's going to hold the job and, you know, remain in the job, because you're going to leave for children pretty soon. You know, you're getting to that kind of age where, you know, you're going to settle down and have kids, and we don't want to have to retrain someone after you're gone. And they literally admitted she was perfectly capable of doing the job, and in fact she was probably the best candidate for doing the job, but they just didn't want to have to retrain someone when she went for maternity leave, which not only obviously assumes that she's not coming back after having children, which in itself is a pretty big presumption, but also, you know, was pretty much not letting her progress because they expect her to have children. And her reply was, I mean, she has children now, but her reply was, I don't want children. I've never wanted children. It's not part of my plan. I'm a career woman. And they still, after that, didn't let her progress. And it's only now that her children have grown up, she's actually got a senior role.
Mad, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the fact that those things don't go hand in hand as well, that idea that you can't have a family and a career, like, it's mad. But I've been told similar things. You know, I'm kind of getting to that age myself, and I've been told things like, oh, well, if you do go for an interview, don't wear your engagement ring. And it's like, would you tell a man that? Like, that's just mad. Or even senior women in like senior positions that have said, oh, well, if you do want kids, then you can't be serious about your career because you can't want both. Like, if even the women in these positions are saying these things, and it's
Yeah.
not everyone, don't get me wrong, like there's a lot of people who don't think that way, but I do think that that mindset is definitely still there, and it's definitely still a problem.
How about Charlotte? Do you remember? So me and Charlotte do music together at uni, and it was something with Annika, and Annika is I did musicology with her, and we literally did women in music and feminist music, and it was mind opening. Like, I really want to do it as a topic, but I will literally just be talking for like an hour because there's so much to say about it. But she basically openly admitted that she's quite high up in the sort of teaching in the university kind of thing, and she basically openly admitted that she's married, but she's chosen her career over children.
Women shouldn't have to make that choice. Men aren't having to make that choice, so why should women have to make that choice? You make a decision as a couple, whatever that couple might look like. You make a decision together to have a family, so it's something that you should decide on together, what the impacts on your various careers are going to be.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I also want to like touch upon the fact that I know it's a completely different topic, but I think it does link the sort of pay gap issue, because I think obviously the example that I spoke about, the woman in my family, she has witnessed the pay gap issue. She's doing the exact same job as a man but being paid significantly less, etc. However, I think I actually watched a video of like some male activists talking about the pay gap, and I mean it was incredibly irritating to watch, but they did bring up a point of they don't think the pay gap is a thing, and then it's like been proven wrong, whatever. And I was just like, eye roll. But when they then counteracted that and said, well, actually, there is such thing as a wage gap, and I went, right, okay. And he elaborated it more, and he said that it's, women are sort of conditioned to go into lower paid jobs like being a teacher.
Yeah.
And men are pushed towards maybe going for a senior role, and that even if a woman was to be in quite a prestigious workplace, she'd probably be working beneath a male as perhaps possibly an assistant or someone at the front desk or something. And he was speaking about that, and he was like, it's not that they're necessarily paid less for doing the same job, which we'd have to look at the facts to work out whether that is true or false, but I think it is interesting to think that there is a wage gap, and what we think we're pushed towards.
So I feel very fortunate to be in the position I am, and I think overall I've been very fortunate to have very good mentors, both male and female, and to have not really experienced, you hear stories of horrendous things happening, which are clearly not right, of male superiors abusing their power on kind of particularly students, and it does happen, and obviously that's not right. But I think what surprised me more than anything as I kind of progressed through my career was just the kind of subtle everyday things that happen, are kind of more ingrained and hardwired into people, because I think those are the things that are, one, going to be harder to change because it's just, as I say, every day and happens all the time. And it's also the things that I think people aren't aware of. Like, most of my colleagues are lovely people, honestly.
Yeah.
And they're not out there to try and make the women around them feel inferior or feel less than, but you still have those occasions when you're in meetings, for example. And I've been in meetings regularly where I'm the only woman at the table, and it can be really hard to kind of get your word in, or you have that, they call it, have you heard of heap eating, they call it? So like you can be a woman at a meeting and kind of have an idea and say like, oh, I think we should do this for this project. And there's a kind of general like, yeah, fine. And then people move on. But then 5 minutes later, a male colleague will say, oh, actually, I think we should do this. And everyone goes, oh, yeah, that's a great idea. And these things happen. And I don't think these people are deliberately doing these things. People generally go to work because they want to get stuff done, right? And these microaggressions are not helpful, and they're not, I think, deliberate. But they definitely happen, definitely. And I think that's why conversations like this are so important, because men and women alike, if they're made aware of these things, then they can be more conscious in terms of dealing with them and stopping that kind of behavior.
Definitely. And I think as well, like we said it quite a few videos ago as well, especially I think it was when we were talking about sex, and I think we said like it's not necessarily the man's fault that we feel this way, because the patriarchal society has affected both genders, and pushed both genders to act a certain way. And it is the whole point that I made this channel was literally to sort of address these issues so that they can be broken down, dissected a bit, and hopefully changed. So I think it's like even just talking about the small little things that you might go through every day at work and think not really a big deal, but like when you add it up, it is. And I think it is important to talk about the small little things. But Charlotte, what about you? You were going to say something.
Yeah, so I mean, this isn't as fancy as like your two's jobs. I used to work in a chip shop, so but still there's obviously like in all businesses, a hierarchy of staff. So the owner was a man, all the managers were men, the cooks were seen as kind of like higher up than the counter staff, they were all men, and every member of counter staff was a woman, which women are the ones doing the serving, men are doing the ones like providing in that kind of sense. But yeah, the kind of like the talk of like abuse of power in the more senior roles. So just before I left that job, for this reason specifically is why I left, the manager was trying, so I was 16 at this job, I turned 17 just before I left. The manager was trying to get me to kind of like recruit my like friends from college so that they had more staff, because like everyone started leaving at the same time. And they actually said to me, send me a link to their Facebook profile so I can check all their photos before I invite them for an interview. So every one of my friends that asked me if they could have a job, I was like, no, you can't. I will not allow it. Like I tell everyone, I'm like, don't work there. But like, I think even that, like it doesn't sound that serious, but like I could see by all of your faces that like it's still like a big deal.
I'd argue it is quite serious. That's pretty weird,
like
especially considering the age.
It's kind of stupid, isn't it? It's more like kind of checking you out before you actually
before they even got an interview.
I think it's really interesting you say that, especially because they were like the serving girls, they're the front of house. And I think I've heard loads of stories about air hostesses and how they are really pressurized to wear a full face of makeup. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but I could not think of anything worse. Flying back and forth with a full face of makeup on. Are you mad? I would not even, I don't even wear makeup on a daily basis. You're very lucky I even have eyeshadow on today, to be honest. They were expected to be beautiful, welcoming, but then you see the male air hostesses or air hosts, the men, and they're rarely as glamorous, or definitely like I don't think I've ever seen one wear makeup, but I'm willing to see that because that would show a change in society. Exactly. But even then, you consider a lot of the pilots are actually men as well. I don't think I've actually ever had a female pilot ever.
I think really interesting because like if I use the example of, we're talking about air hostesses in Singapore Airlines, basically like the air hostesses, they need to be a very specific shape, and then they have a very specific height, and they have a specific body, must be of a specific ethnicity. So you've got to be Asian for a start. You've got to be specific Asian. You can't just be like, it's like specific skin color. If I go that specific, like, and if you don't cut that, then you don't even get considered, and you're put in a very kind of tight fitting, traditional but very tight fitting outfit, very tight fitting kind of uniform, and with a lot of makeup, and they kind of wear heels, like kind of heels the whole flight, and then of course the men are in very comfortable like suits and very kind of
completely functional outfits. I mean,
it's interesting actually, because I would say that almost in sciences you get the exact opposite, in that I've been told personally, and I know other kind of female researchers that get the same, that we're kind of given the impression if you dress up too much, like if you wear too much makeup, or maybe I quite like floral clothes, like floral blouses or skirts or what have you, but that will make me be taken less seriously because I'm dressing up too much and I care too much about what I look like, and I shouldn't. And even, you get it from people, not just at work. I've had people that I've just met in my kind of day-to-day life, and when they say like, oh, what do you do? And I say, oh, well, I'm a scientist, they go, oh really, well you don't look like a scientist. And I'm like, well what should I look like as a scientist, please tell me.
I think as well, like your point of wearing makeup and that, like you know, maybe if you want to be taken more professionally, not wearing so much. And I think, I mean, it's slightly unrelated, but it is, I kind of got a bit of a relation, which was back in school. I remember I went to school with, you know, like foundation on and stuff. I used to be really self-conscious of my skin and stuff, so I used to wear a lot of makeup. And I remember being told by the deputy head, she sent me home because I was wearing too much makeup, and she said, I don't really understand why you're wearing that much makeup. You know, like you could be spending all that time that you're spending on your makeup actually like educating yourself and learning more and bettering your understanding of your subjects. And I'm like, I still do all that. I just add an extra 10 minutes each morning to apply some foundation. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, it doesn't mean I'm a worse student just because I've got a bit of foundation on.
Exactly. There's no reason you can't do both.
Exactly.
Both very well.
Exactly. I mean, I also wanted to say, kind of links to Charlotte's point. Like my job wasn't overly an impressive job. I was a carer for old people, and I used to go to their houses. And I mean, I already felt weird when I walked in. So when I applied online, I had no idea actually what the job role really implied. Maybe if I knew now, like, well, maybe if I knew what I knew now then, I probably wouldn't have applied, because I wiped a lot of bums and washed a lot of body parts that I wish I hadn't washed. But I mean, it was a very rewarding job. But I remember when I first went to my interview, there was, so in the office, not even the carers themselves, but in the office there was one man, and he was the accountant. So he was the one that did all the counting, all the, you know, the maths, the big work. It actually started like, you know, the training to be a carer. And I remember I did 2 weeks of training, one man, the whole of the 2 weeks. And there was like different groups for the different 2 weeks. The second week there was actually no man because the man decided not to do it. But then I was like, I would say like that's a significant thing, but then it's also, it's a very, very low paid job. Especially because I was traveling between houses and houses. I was having to get the bus in between a lot of places because the time span, we were given 5 minutes to go from each client, and some of them were half an hour away from each other. So, you know, like I'd be running, catching the bus, and every time I went on the bus, that's £1.50 paid for by myself, and I was getting £4 for half an hour. So imagine I did two half-an-hour slots, got the bus there and back, that's £3. I'm literally getting paid £1 for a half an hour. But I'd like to highlight as well, I was also the only white woman. In fact, not even the only white woman, I was the only white person in the whole company.
Wow.
And I think, you know, it's important to count your privileges anyway. You know, as a white woman, I definitely have more privileges, but I mean, I don't think, even the men that were in the company, they weren't white. And I don't think I'd be so shocked if I ever saw a white man in those sort of jobs. Probably men, like white men, pretty high up within the chain of that company, you know, probably the ones that like deal with all the legal stuff because they're like lawyers or something. But I think it's like it's insane to me how, you know, when you actually really open your eyes to these things, how obvious they are even now in 2021.
I think it's interesting because, like, if you think about like carers, teachers, nursery practitioners, even nursery practitioners, you get to manager level. I looked at the salary; it's not that much. Like, but like if you think about it, like, well, obviously in the early years, what we learn, like, you know, it's most important, like 5 years or whatever. But there's not much emphasis put on training. There's not much emphasis put on, you know, it's like they kind of like, I would, to be honest, I was kind of chucked in, like off you go, you know, kind of figure out what you're doing. But it's not, I don't think those sort of jobs are also taken that seriously either. And also they are quite obviously female dominated, and they're not really paid, they're not, you know, they're not really paid, like especially teachers. I feel like teachers especially who do a lot of work, a lot of extra hours, are not paid nearly enough either. And I feel like that is quite an interesting issue. And that's something as a nursery practitioner I noticed as well, was that even if you go, you know, higher up and things, you know, I think you're doing quite an important job with young children.
100%.
Yeah,
You shape the child's future.
This is the thing, like, you know, we're looking after, like, especially the kids who are in 5 days a week, we're looking after them honestly from 7:30 till 6. It's a long day, and I think some practitioners maybe don't take it, like, I don't know, maybe you don't take it seriously enough because you're not being paid very much, and the people are working really hard, and it's I don't know, it's hard to explain, but like it didn't feel very like cared about, like, especially now we're in lockdown. Early years are still open, and I don't know, I don't feel like there's very, like, a lot of regard.
I think as well, when you think back when you were in school, I know when I look back in my primary school and my secondary school years, how many of the higher roles, like head teachers and senior leaders, were men. I mean, we had a very, very strong woman as our head teacher in primary school, and I'd say probably a lot. You know, it wasn't quite up to the role, but the deputy head was a man, but he wasn't quite, you know, on the same level. But the thing I find really interesting when I think back to her as the head teacher was that, you know, she wasn't your traditional woman. She, you know, she had very short hair, you know, like was quite a loud woman. And I think when you think of all the other teachers that were there, you know, they were like very ladylike again, I'm sorry, it's a horrible term, but do you know what I mean? And I think even that interests me. But my secondary school, again, head teacher was man, deputy head was a woman who I had many run-ins in with. She didn't like me overly too much, but that's a whole nother story. But she also, again, you know, was a very, I want to say masculine woman, but it doesn't sound right coming out of my mouth. But she, you know, she was a not what society would deem a very, I sound so bad saying it, but do you know what I mean? Like, she wasn't a woman by society.
I know exactly what you mean. I think generally the characteristics that tend to come with being a woman are seen in society as those kind of characteristics that aren't what you need for the kind of more powerful roles. You know, it's not right, but I think that's generally what people
Definitely
think about.
I think, like, you know, the fact that this woman was like notoriously single, and, you know, I think the students took the piss out of her a lot for that, but it was because, you know, she was a powerful woman. You know, everyone was petrified of her. I mean, I'm surprised I ever actually raised my voice at her, because I wouldn't dare do it now. She is a scary woman. But I now, looking back, I have so much respect for her, because I'm like, you know, it must take some balls to hold on to all those characteristics as a woman, knowing that society is pretty much firmly against you. And I'm pretty sure she did it for her career, because she wanted to be sort of like one of the leading roles in a school, because she was so passionate. You know, you really don't see that when you're in secondary school. You think you know best, but looking back, I'm like, she was so passionate about wanting the school to be perfect and for the students to be, you know, the best that they can be, do the best that they could. And, you know, she arguably was probably one of my favorite, now looking back, one of my favorite people in the school. I mean, at the time I genuinely hated her, but that's because she wouldn't let me wear makeup, basically. Or short skirts.
Do you think those characteristics that she was showing, do you think that was the way she always was, or do you think she kind of became that way to get where she wanted to be in her career?
I think that's a very interesting point. I mean, honestly, I'd love to have her on the channel and have her opinion, because I mean, I can't speak for her, but
no,
I think, I don't know, because her characteristics seemed very ingrained within her person. And even when you see her, so I had her for my interview for, you know, from when I was in secondary school to going into the sixth form, and because she was one of the leader ones, and I was petrified. I was like, why do I have her? Why can't I have one of the nice people? But, you know, actually, like, even my mum was in the meeting with me, and we both said it. We were both like, that was, you know, it was really nice to have her on a more chilled vibe. But even then, you know, she was very, almost a crazy cat lady kind of vibe. I mean, that in itself is also a horrible term, because you want to not get married and have loads of cats, I think that's pretty cool and admirable. I might even opt for that option in life. But sorry, Jordan. But like, I don't know, like maybe I wouldn't have had as many run-ins with her if she was just an English teacher. I don't know. I mean, I would have loved to have had my dad on this call, because I know I've had quite a few discussions with him about how he's obviously like I think he's a managing director, I think is his role. Can't fully recall. But he said that he hires people. He like helps with the sort of the hiring process, and he said that he hires people on capability and ability. But I was like questioning him, and I said, like, do you know, like how many women are part of the hiring process? You know, like how many women in comparison to men hold the role of hiring people? Because I think as much as he says, you know, he hires people on ability, I think unconsciously there is also, you know, he's a man and society has sort of groomed him to be a certain way, and probably does unconsciously hire more men than women. And I think I so wanted him on this call just to like sort of look into that further, because I've only discussed it with him over text, so it's not like I didn't go into that much detail, but I do think that like that is another change that needs to happen, you know, giving women higher roles. I think, Rebecca, you kind of touched on it as well, like when there's not that many higher women in the roles for you to look up to and aspire to, like it does count on a more practical side of things. Like if there is men hiring, they are more likely to hire men.
Yeah, it's an interesting point actually, because as I say, I've been very fortunate at the places that I've worked, and particularly where I work now, it's very kind of focused on addressing inequalities in science. And one of the things that they've started doing is they've started insisting that there is at least one female on every hiring panel. And when I first heard it, it really bugged me, because I was like, well, that shouldn't have to be a thing. Like it should just be. But then actually you're like, well, you've got to go through the process to kind of, you know, break down those barriers and make things more equal. So it is a good thing.
Definitely. I mean, my dad has a sort of like counter argument to that, and he says he gets quite annoyed because actually it wasn't my dad. It might not have actually been my dad. It was a man I spoke to. I must have been my dad, but he said that it gets quite irritated, or whoever said it, they said they get quite irritated because then it becomes like a tick box thing, rather than, you know, the woman that is obliged to be on the hiring box, you know, might not actually be the best for the job. And I'm like, but it definitely needs to be there, because without that there is never going to be that change and that shift, and it might be uncomfortable, but it's necessary.
Yeah, and especially doing the kind of thing that we do, you know, at the end of the day, what we do is research, and we're doing things that are new every day that we're at work. We're pushing the boundaries and doing new things, and you need the ideas to be able to do that. And the way you get the most diverse ideas is by having the most diverse people around the table.
So yeah, we had quite a few interesting points, and I think they definitely can lead on to more videos and more topics for the future. Especially, I'd really like to go into the pay gap sort of issue thing, and also calling women bossy for being assertive and stuff. But for now, I think we're gonna have to draw that to a close. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe, and follow all our social medias. They'll be in the description. Yeah, thank you. Bye.